patrons asked me about doing a little demonstration about this bronze armor that I have been doing on this card art here that I'm working on right now. So Frank, I hope this is helpful, and for everybody else watching as well. Greenish for this greenish tint of bronze. Most of these colors, by the way, are by Schminke, which is a German brand, and as you can see, some of my very favorite Daniel Smith as well. This is Schminke again. Green umber, very nice color, perfect for bronze. So before working, you already know that I do this. I spray my palette with water so that the paint is ready to go. I'm going to cover a couple of different techniques in this video here. One of them is mixing paint on the paper rather than on the palette. I'm going to show you how you drawing out paint with water, and probably also some lifting off. So let's start with these figures here. This is a quinacridone gold tone that I'm going to use more or less for the base of the bronze. The brushes I'm using are a quite cheap German brand named I Love Art. I almost didn't buy them because that sounded so silly, but they're excellent. They are synthetic brushes, not real animal hair, which I found very nice to do. So let's start with this one here. I'm going to leave just a bit of space here at the top where the light is going to hit. So now I've got this quite dark shade down here, and I want to make it lighter towards the back, so I clean my brush and go in with just water, and with the water I just draw out the color. You can see getting lighter towards the end here. I leave a bit of space so that this bit will stand out against the darker lower part of this main figure here. So now for a bit of the magic. So I'll mix a bit of the green umber with a bit of the sap green. In one of these small spaces here. The paint here is still wet, which is important. So now for mixing paint on the paper, I just drop a bit of green right here. And now I go in again with a bit of the bronze color so that the variation of color here remains interesting. I'm working on cold press paper by Canson, which is, after all these years, still one of my main brands, one of my favorite brands. Most Canson papers are excellent for taking off paint again. So if you've made a mistake or just want to brighten a bit of the paper later on, Canson paper will normally let you do this. I'm going to drop in a bit of darker shade here again, just dropping it in after or while the paint is still wet. And I will just let it do whatever it feels it needs to do. Still, it's already dried here, so I'm going to re-wet it again so that it can disperse more freely. You can see that I've got a very nice bronze tone back here now. Let's go for a bit more green again. And a bit of the darker tone. Let's use a smaller brush for this. And the magnifying glass will also come in very handy here. Magnifying glass, my best friend. Now I can see everything. That's nice. So good. For taking off color, I've been looking at this morning and found that some spots here on the breastplate could just be a bit lighter than they are right now. So what I'm doing is use a very soft brush. I don't want to destroy the paper in any way, and just paint some water on this spot here. And then I go in with a tissue and just carefully dab off some of the paint. And now it's a bit lighter. For any metal effect, what you're going for is usually strong contrast between light areas and dark areas. So the more your light areas are exactly right next to darker areas, the more shiny the metal will be. You see that I do not have very deep darks here, but sort of intermediate darks, because I don't want the bronze armor to look like chrome or something like that. So I'm still going to add a bit deeper darks here. Drop in a bit of green. And you already see how the metal effect becomes stronger. These brushes, by the way, as I told you, are synthetic, not made of sable, which is what I've been using for years and years before I decided I did not want to use brushes that I didn't know how they were made, harvested, whatever you want to call it. I just didn't like the thought of not knowing how these animals gave their hair. So I switched to these synthetic brushes, and most of the time, most watercolor artists love sable brushes, and I was no exception. But these ones are actually extremely close to the feel of actual sable brushes because of two main properties they have. I'm going to demonstrate this and show this with one of the bigger ones. So what you're looking for in a watercolor brush is a very soft hair that's very flexible, but still able to form a very fine tip here. You can see that this does that. The smaller ones even more so, as you see. and you're looking for a brush that has quite a bit of body here so that it holds a lot of water and thus a lot of paint. And with most older brushes, you had either the good ones or the bad ones. So sable brushes had all that, and synthetic brushes didn't. And so these new makes of synthetic brush are really, really, really close to the good old sable brushes, which is why I'm using them. Right, so this one still hasn't dried, so I can't keep working on this. For any strong contrast to stay in your watercolor painting, you always want to make sure that you paint on dry paint. I can demonstrate this on this helmet now. So going in with slightly darker tones, still with this greenish tinge. So as you can see, when I now paint in the darker tones, there's no mixing of color apart from what I'm drawing out with water here again. If I drop in something here, it will now run wherever the paint is still wet, but apart from that, we're going to be left with very nicely crisp edges when we want them. A lot of people keep asking, how on earth do you get crisp edges in your watercolor paintings? So some beginners tend to ask this because they think of watercolor as wet into wet and feel that any watercolor painting is going to be quick and expressive and extremely wet. And if you do that, of course, you are going to be left with a lot of very expressionist color blendings and not a lot of precise work. So any precise work that you want to do will have to happen on dry paint. And as you can see, the white edges that I have left here still stand out extremely clearly. Again, for some drawing out of paint, I will just let this slide into these areas here. And again here. I will just drop in a bit of more reddish bronze color. Here again, strong contrast. It's a bit too much, so I'm going to go in again with a bit of water and we'll just draw it out, just like this. So just a bit of more dark there, and then I will call this helmet done. Okay, so as you can see down here, the paint is still not quite dry, so we are just going to let this sit for a while and dry all the way through. So we're back. The paper has dried, which you can always tell by touching the surface and making sure it doesn't feel cold any longer, and also when you can tell that the paper is quite smooth again and the warping has reduced. So I'm going to do the same things that I did on the helmet of the king, and I'm going to use a smaller brush, definitely. for this one, and I will go in with the darker darks and make sure that the helmet is shaped. Again, you can see no blending of the paint unless I use water, like here. I made a small mistake here by drawing this line up all the way, so I'm going to see if I can get rid of this. For that, we're going to need the smaller instruments, so I will take a Q-tip and just paint the line I want to remove with a bit of water. Very gently. Some of the paint is already coming off, and I will then just rub off this. Okay, some of the background has also come off. Yeah, you can't really work very precise with this, but that's okay. So I will have to wait now for this area to dry entirely, otherwise everything will just run into this bit again. So we are just going to work here. Again, I'm drawing out this bit with some water, and let's have some more green here. I'm going to let some of these blotches just stand for a more irregular look. Drop in a bit of orangey. I did the same thing up here. That is already dried as well, so I can keep working on this. If you work on paintings with a lot of detail, you can usually always find a dry spot on which it is possible to work. So very often, especially in this detail stage, I do not have long drying times to wait out, but I can usually find some area that can be worked on. So this contrast again for the metal effect. This painting will be used in a card game being put together by the Changeling Artist Collective and will hit Kickstarter later this year, so I will keep you posted on the progress of this. So now I can go in here again, it's dry, and I can also repair this bit in the back here that I have rubbed off together with my other repair work. As you can see, I can now work very precisely again now that everything here has dried, and it's definitely been an improvement with this line here. I will use a lot of water again to draw out this bit of darker paint. And we'll just let it trail off around here, blend into what I have already painted, lift off a bit of the wet paint here as well. So now this bit is too bright, so I'm going to give that the same treatment. This one too. And I think that's pretty much all I want. When this dries, you will be able to see that this is going to dry to a lighter shade. That is always the case with watercolor, so every watercolor painter knows that in order to have exactly the color he or she wants, you need to actually paint darker than you want in the end, which is one of the difficult things to master for precise color work for every watercolor artist starting out, because that's just something you have to get the hang of in order to work with it. So I hope you have enjoyed this little demonstration. If you want to see more of what I do, please check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/JennyDolphin, also linked in the description below. And so see you next time.